I won't go into my pedigree versus environment as to both sides of the Tasman. It's too long and complicated a story. But I have the privilege of being associated with the BLG beef progeny test, which is a project I'm pretty passionate about. It's probably the best one I've ever worked on in my career, I think. And so today I'll tell you where we're at, and some of it will be a little bit preliminary, and there's one or two graphs that I'm not going to show you because I don't have enough confidence in them yet, which might be a little bit frustrating for you, but I'd rather, if I'm going to get lynched, I'd rather be lynched for solid data rather than data that changes. So I'll hold a couple of things back, but try and give you an update as best as I can. And the reason for that is that the data I'm talking about, which is carcass ultrasound data, only got collected 2 weeks ago, the last of it, so it's still pretty fresh. So a lot of you have, that's right, Becky, you told me to turn this thing on, didn't you? A lot of you have probably heard this introduction before, but why are we doing this project? And basically the questions that ultimately we want to answer across the BLG beef program include how much value does the right genetics return in commercial beef operations? We want to help demonstrate the current tools and new tools and work on improving the toolkit. So the third one's a longer term thing, and you can't do that without data and information. So that's a longer term work in progress, but certainly at the moment in that data collection phase and showing what genetics is doing in commercial operations. And part of it was that a lot of people I hear say, well, yes, it's all very well to have all these numbers, but they're all collected in studs, and you know, the perception is out there that stud animals are not necessarily pushed as hard commercially. Now that may be an incorrect perception, but it's certainly the perception. And so we're really trying to say, actually commercially, do we get the benefit from the better bulls that we are putting into operations? And to be honest, even with some of the farm managers that we're working with, you know, they were initially sort of thinking, well, they're a little, you know, that was a question of interest to them. How much value are they actually getting for paying for good genetics? And I guess from a bigger picture too, you know, there's a lot of debate in the industry around what's the right sort of cow that we should be having on hill country. You know, how do we balance maternal genetics and cows that get back in calf every year and that can handle a bit of punishment and get through it? And how do we balance that against the finishing performance and carcass value that we want? And in the industry now, we've clearly got, I guess, emerging in New Zealand, and it's been overseas for quite some time. So the existence of several branded beef programs, I guess you'd say, that reward traits like marbling, etc., and meat quality. So how does genetics contribute to that? And then, of course, the overall question of how do different cow management strategies actually impact on this? So is it one horse for all courses, or is it different horses for different courses? So just to remind you, in this project, we're inseminating a touch over 2,000 beef cows per year, and we're working on 5 commercial properties. One's Whangarā Farms up near Gisborne, Angus Cow Base, the Rangatike Station, just near Lochinvar Station on the Napier-Taupo Highway. It's a Landcourt place. Angus cow herd again. Tautani Station in Southern Hawke's Bay out on the coast, and again an Angus herd, and that just seemed to be the way that the herds that we were, it wasn't a deliberate trying to go out and get Angus herds, it just seemed to be what came forward. We actually did deliberately go out and make sure we had a South Island Hereford herd, and that's Mendip Hills, owned by the Black family. And then Cabafay Station, owned by Lone Star Farms, which is also an Angus cow base as well. And also to remind you where we are in this project. So we started this project in 2014 with an AI program at the end of 2014. And as you all know, things take a little while in beef. It's not quite like in sheep where you can make put rams out and have the lambs dead within 12 months. In beef, things take a little longer. So where we are now in our cohort 1 calves, we've collected, the heifers have been mated. We've collected information on conception to those heifers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We've done ultrasound carcass, and we're just starting to kill steers. So it takes a while. And then cohort 2 and cohort 3, cohort 2, the calves were born last year and they've just been weaned, and the cohort 3 calves will be born later this year. So it is still early days, even though we've been going for 3 years. So the questions are, I guess, does genetics make a real difference commercially? How much size variation are we seeing? And how much value is created? And we haven't done the value part yet. We haven't sort of done the economic numbers around any of this. We can't do that until we actually have some real numbers to work on. But just to give you an idea in terms of heritability, which I guess is just another way of saying the amount of genetic variation that we're seeing in these commercial herds. And, there's a bunch of heritability estimates there. The numbers themselves don't necessarily, mean too much down to the decimal place, but broadly speaking, they are similar to what we would see in stud herds for those different traits. And basically, the overall message is that genetics is expressing itself in those commercial herds, and we are seeing the real differences. So previously we've released information on weaning weight and 12-month weight. So this is the information on really the 18-month weight taken at the same time as scanning. So sort of March on some farms and April on others. And each of those bars in these graphs represents a bull. And you can see by the colour coding there what breeds those bulls are. For Angus, we've separated out the New Zealand Angus versus some of the international bulls that we've used. This is in the first cohort, obviously, and then the other colours show. So, no big surprises there in terms of spread and in terms of, I guess, breed ranking. No one's going to be surprised that sires that are generally regarded more as terminal sires are going to be higher growth. So no big surprises there. But how does that relate to the EBVs? And I'm going to put up a graph, or actually a whole bunch of graphs, that is very similar to the graph that Beck just put up. And if you remember, Beck explained quite nicely that you would expect, if EBVs were being expressed in these herds, that you would expect to see a slope on those lines of 0.5. So for extra kilo of EBV of the bull, we'll get half a kilo of progeny performance difference. So what happens? It varies because you're running an experiment and there's always some error around these estimates as well, and that will tighten up as time goes by. But certainly for 18-month weight, it's not quite 0.5, but probably it's not that different to 0.5 either. And so, yeah, overall message is the EBVs are being expressed in terms of the weight. Now I'm going to talk about the carcass traits, and as I said before, this is a little bit preliminary. We are still analysing the data. There's one or two things that I'm not confident enough in to show you, but for the carcass type scan traits, this is eye muscle area, and it is adjusted for live weight. So I've done that to put it on the same sort of basis as what breed plan does. So when you look at an eye muscle area in breed plan, it's adjusted to a constant carcass weight. So it's not just saying bigger bulls have, bigger growthier animals have higher eye muscles, they do, but after you adjust for that, it's more a measure of sort of muscularity, and you can see what's happening there yourself. You wouldn't say, I guess, there are a bunch of bulls mixed through that graph. Again, the terminal size tend to be towards the heavier end of that, or not the heavier end, the higher EMA per kilo live weight end. But not exclusively, and there's good variation right through. And in terms of the slope of that line or relationship of what's happening compared to the bull's EBVs, again, the slope's not quite 0.5, but there certainly is a significant relationship there. So we're capturing at least 60%, but possibly more of that value. For fat depth over the pH site on the rump, again, the bulls are spread, and there is differences between genetics as you would expect. Of a couple of mils between the top sire and I shouldn't say top, the fattest sire and the leanest sire. Try not to put value judgments on these traits because we are into balanced breeding. And the slope on the fat depth ones are lower, and I don't have the answer at this point for what's going on there. Really only got those results in the last couple of days out of the analysis, and haven't had really time to burrow down. But yeah, so it does appear that the fat on these animals is not as strongly following the EBVs as I might have expected and might have hoped for, but it is what it is, and we'll see what happens as the project goes on, whether that changes at all. For rib fat, I've got a couple of concerns about the way the analysis at the moment just is presenting the different size, so I'm not going to show that, and I'm not going to show the same graph for marbling, but I am going to show again the relationship with the sire EBV, and again for rib fat, for some reason, the relationship hasn't come out quite as strongly as I would have expected. Again, so we'll go back to have a look at that in a bit more depth in the next few weeks. Intramuscular fat, actually the slope's double what you would expect right now, but again, there are variations around these estimates, so I'm not going to go out and say we're getting twice as much as what we expect, but I think the message is that IMF EBVs do work, and it is the only tool, because you can't look at an animal and see IMF in it. So from a commercial point of view, we are getting that expression of IMF EBVs, and I think, as I said before, that these are going to become more of a focus in the industry now than what they have been in the past, particularly with the branded beef programs that are out there and being successful at the moment. So heifer reproduction, and the trait that that I'll talk about is conception date. So what we've done with these animals, all these heifers have been naturally joined to the bulls that happen to be on the farm, or that the farm's purchased for joining heifers. And we've gone in there, and we've actually gone in there for fetal age scanning, so quite early compared to when you would normally scan a cow. And we do it because you can scan between about 30 to 80, 90 days. You can get a reasonably accurate age within about 5 days of how old that fetus is, and therefore work backwards and say when was that conceived. And I've expressed it, obviously there's different joining dates across the herds, but I've expressed it in the number of days from the first pregnant heifer as a proxy for when the bull went out. And I'm only going to present the Angus results here while we sort out what's happening across the breeds. But you can see here that there was a range of those bulls between around about 2.5 days, which doesn't sound that much, but it is actually reasonably significant. And if you think about your EBVs, most breeds, probably the scale is for days to calving. For a days to calving EBV is around about, from say 0, -1 through to about -6, -7. So, and these are halved, so the differences are halved, obviously. So it's actually not that different to what you would see, or what you would expect to see from a days to calving type of EBV. I guess interestingly, international Angus size that we've used there spread right through. There's no, I wouldn't say there's any trend that, well, there's certainly no clustering up the top or down the bottom. They're sort of varied through the thing. And in terms of that slope again, it's 0.59. So I think, the message there is that at least in these heifers, looking at what's a fairly similar trait to days to calving, but it's in heifers, remember, whereas days to calving The vast majority of the data that goes into that is actually cow data, but it is working. Days to calving as an EBV, there's probably ways that we can improve it, and part of the project that Graham mentioned before, we would like to get better ways of assessing fertility, and we'll be working on that in the long term. But what we've got right now does work. So I think that's the clear message. We also had a look at the conception date of the heifers against EBVs of other traits for those bulls as well. And these are horrible graphs, and I don't expect you to I'm not going to go through the graphs in detail, just to show you that we looked at it. And basically what we found is a slight relationship with EBVs for rump fat and rib fat. So, and this probably won't surprise anyone in this room, that the bulls that were had higher EBVs tended to have slightly earlier conception. So, again, no one's looking surprised, but the data is showing that. But remember, this is in a heifer, reproduction is actually a little bit different to in a cow. In a heifer, you're talking about puberty basically, whereas in a cow, you're talking about different physiological processes. And we also looked at the EBVs for 600-day weight, mature weight, and carcass weight. And while the line there looks like it's got some slope, it wasn't actually significant. So the relationship is not there at this stage. So where are we going now? Well, we're just in the phase where we're just starting carcass data collection. The first 22 steers, which was half the steers from Cabafay, were killed on the 2nd of May. And they did really well, actually. So I'm going to tell you all about the phenotypic performance, because we'll probably never do as well again. But they were 298 average carcass weight. Of the 22, 21 graded on the beef EQ scale. And you've got to remember the national average is about 28%. And the one that failed, just failed on pH. Its marbling would have got it, had the pH not been there, its marbling would have got it across the line. And that photo there is one of the ribeyes from those steers, and you can see a good degree of marbling. So those steers were they were wintered last year as weaners on fodder beet. Probably came off the fodder beet around about October, and since then Cabafay have kept them ticking along. They've got a lot of fescue pasture there. They've done a good job of those animals, but they haven't been doing anything out of the ordinary, other than growing them well to get to a 298 kilo carcass at this time of year. So what's that, 18, 20 months, something like that. I was talking on the plane with Robert, and he said, it's a shame that it wasn't all of them graded, because we'd like to get the message out there that genetics is really important and it does influence your grading. And I think the answer is actually it is still important. And Cabafay, I guess, in their cow herd, they would have been using marbling genetics in there for a number of years, and so they certainly had the cow base in there to be able to achieve these results from a marbling point of view. And I think in general that's what we would be seeing across the board, that the herds that are achieving the better results under a program like this are the ones that probably looked ahead 10 years and put marbling genetics into their herds, or started doing that 10 plus years ago, and so I've got a good cow base in terms of marbling potential. So it's going to take us most of this year, and depending on how the seasons go, even possibly early next year, before all these steers are killed, and some heifers too, so the terminal heifers will also be killed. One of the learnings that you get from this, in terms of even just trying to predict when animals are going to be ready for killing, is meat companies have a hell of a job trying to work out when your animals are coming in. Because even with 5 farmers, I'm struggling, and my early predictions are way out. And you know, I think it's, you know, any more than sort of 4 weeks out, it's a lottery to predict anything. So hats off to the meat companies who do this with 5,000 farmers, not 5. So it's one of my learnings. So how is the information going to be released in the future? Certainly information on the principles, and so when I say principles, I mean, you know, relationships with EBVs, how is this all working, the generalities that we can take out of it. We'll continue releasing those, and in terms of written material and events like this. We do intend to put out sire performance summaries, and we haven't put any of those out yet, which identify individual sires, but we will do that. We will we will make sure that we do that in a sensitive way, and that we don't say, you know, it's not all about carcass, or it's not all about one thing or another. And we'll probably follow a model that's perhaps similar to what the Australians use in terms of the way they release their progeny test information, which is really adjusted sire performance levels. And then thirdly, we will make the data available to Breed Plan, and we're talking to them at the moment about just how we do that in terms of databases and the mechanism behind it. And we know how we want to do it. It's just a matter of getting on and creating that facility within their database. So that data should be available to them to incorporate into analyses. And that's all I have to say. So thank you for your attention this afternoon. And any questions?
Yes, Jason, the presentation of results is all in individual EBVs. Is there any thought, because they contribute overall to the profitability of an animal, all the individuals, is there any thought of putting those, economically weighting them in dollar values and putting them into an index?
Absolutely. I'll give that to the microphone. Yep, absolutely, John. In time, we will do that. Like right now, I've only had 2 weeks with the data, so I haven't had the time to do it. And I guess we also need to be fairly careful that we don't do it too early because, as I said before, you know, we are into balanced breeding. It's not all about carcass, and it's not all about maternal either. They're both important. So, but yes, the ultimate question there is, where is the value for these commercial farms? So there's got to be an economic component to it, and we do fully intend to do that.
Jason, how are you picking your carcasses for slaughter? Are you making sure there's sire representation in the slaughter mobs, or and how can you maximise the number of carcasses in the mob to reduce the number of kill days? Yeah, it's a good question, and yeah, look, ideally you kill the whole lot at once in the perfect world, but from a commercial point of view, so you're between a bit of a rock and a hard place. For one, because that costs you opportunity, costs the farms money, but secondly, I then have people saying, well, you know, my bull was, you killed them too early, or whatever. So we're going to try and kill in as fewer mobs as can. So the likes of those 22 at Caberfay, Caberfay was a small site, so that's half of them, and the other half will go probably in a couple of months. At the other sites, we're going to keep the kill numbers down as much as possible. Partly to make our life easy as well as but mainly to make the data as good as we can. And sire representation and breed representation is important. So yes, we'll absolutely be making sure. But if you actually, and I didn't really show results that you can get an idea of, because I just showed each sire was a dot on those graphs. But if I actually showed you those graphs with the spread of calf performance for those sires, and then if you just sort of worked down and took a cut, you would actually see that if you took the top whatever cut of, say, just work within the Angus breed, and in the Angus bulls that we have there, it goes everywhere from, I think, top 1% of the breed for, I think Max worked this out a little while ago, it was top 1% of the breed for weaning for 200-day weight,
down to top 95% of the breed for 200-day weight. So the full spectrum's there. But if you went down and did a cut, every sire would probably be represented in the top cut of calves. Obviously, the heavier sires will be better represented, but they will. And then there's obviously linkage between those groups and the next ones. So, yep.
Just to follow on, excuse me, just to follow up from that, will there be some sort of correction in terms of the days to kill for that? And secondly, my real question was, once the links are established with breed plan, will the data go through as the cohorts progress so that it is incorporated onto the monthly runs?
Yeah.
Rather than just waiting till the end of the program.
Yep. Remind me what your first question was again. I've got a short attention span.
Will there be a day's correction?
Yeah, days correction. Yeah. So when you do kills the way we are, what you lose from that, like the BLUP technology is really actually good as long as you've weighed everything before, especially at the start, and everything's got a weight so it can adjust for a lot of those things. What it probably does mean is that the data on carcass weight that we get, the evaluation on carcass weight that we get is not as good, because when you kill on a live weight basis, that's what's going to happen. But certainly the data on the other traits will be good. So yes, we'll effectively do what you're saying, probably just not quite in the way that you word it, but we'll look after that issue, don't worry. Now, I've got a very short attention span, because what was your second question? The timeliness of breed plan. Yep. So when we've got information on the whole cohort for a trait, then, yeah, we'll put it into breed plan. When I talk with the Angus guys in Australia who run their program over there, their advice was, particularly in terms of the carcass data, to actually wait until you've got the cohort killed, rather than put the carcass data from those 22 animals in there and then the next. We're actually going to be killing more in lines of 80 or so from the bigger sites, and then dribble it in. What they've found is when they do that, and actually they're not even, they're killing everything in one go because they've got a feedlot system over there, it's a little bit easier. They found that even just the different mobs from different farms, that if they dribbled it in, like, every time it comes in, that actually they get some quite screwy sort of results, and it sort of bounces all over the place until the cohort's finished. So their advice and what they do was pretty strongly to not put the carcass data in until the carcass data for that cohort is complete, which I think is probably the more responsible thing to do.
Yeah, just wondering, a lot of farming profitability means keeping your feed over the winter, and if you're killing your steers now in May, what's happened to the female side where you want to genetically get rid of your heifers before their second winter? Why is there no heifers killed so far?
Yeah, so two answers to that. One is, for this project, from the maternal type of breed, so Angus, Hereford and Stabiliser, what we've actually done is we're retaining virtually, well, every heifer that was commercially sound to retain is being retained into those herds. So when we go into those herds, we only, we're not using all their cows, so we might be using, in most sites, about 400 to 500 cows, but they're farms with 1,200 cows on them. So we're retaining all those maternal type heifers back to be able to get a good evaluation of maternal performance. So that's one reason why we haven't killed any heifers. For the terminal heifers, the Simmental cross Angus heifers at Whangarā and Rangataut, which are pretty much the terminal heifers that we've got in the first year of the program, they die next week. So they are getting done before that winter, yeah. Yeah, well, but that's what their system is, essentially. In fact, Rangataut, they normally don't even try and finish anything before the second winter. It just happens to be, that's how they run their system. It's pretty high, pretty cold, and they, because they're not targeting the calf sales, they actually, like our AI programs, mid to late January, so they calve quite late at that site.